Mr. Doval knows nothing about energy security. Mr. Goyal doesn't know anything about energy security. Madam Sitaraman, I don't know what she knows. If I were Modi, and thank God I'm not, I would tomorrow sack Ajit Doval, Sitaraman, Goyal, and above all, Hardeep Puri. We might well be the Saudi Arabia of South Asia, Israel. I think it's an evil country. But nevertheless, I looked at the map and I found that pipeline, the BTC pipeline could easily be extended to a port called Ashkelon on the Israeli Mediterranean coast. And that from there, if we brought a pipeline down to Eilat, which is at the head of the Gulf of Aqaba, we would bypass the Strait of Hormuz. Why is it that you concentrate just on Qatar hai, तो वहां से खरीद लेंगे मामला खत्म and then say नहीं नहीं रूस में है तो वहां से भी हम खरीद लेंगे.
Today I'm joined by Shankar Aiyar, sir. He's a former Union Minister of Petroleum and Gas, and he is a diplomat also. Today we will talk about his article which he wrote for OPED, which he wrote for the Indian Express. So I will talk about this your OPED which you wrote in Indian Express today, where you mentioned that Indian government could have done a preparation earlier to avoid this kind of LPG crisis, which the government is denying that there is no crisis, but many of you guys are saying that there is crisis. And the you talked about that Hamas, when Hamas attacked on Israel, that was the first hint, and the second hint when the last June when the when the US attacked Iran. So if you could tell us about that, how the government could have prepared better.
You see, you have to go back into the background, like I did in my article. What is national security? It is a combination of three different types of security. The first of these is geopolitical security, which is the responsibility of the Ministry of External Affairs. The second type of national security is economic security, for which the Finance Ministry and the Commerce Ministry are responsible. But you can have neither national security, neither geopolitical security, nor economic security if you don't have energy security. Because energy is the basis not only of economic development, but also the defense of the country. This being so, we have to look at it holistically that national security is not merely a matter that concerns Mr. Doval or a matter that concerns Madam Sitaraman and Mr. Goyal, nor is it a matter that concerns only Hardeep Puri. It is a combination of these three that gives you national security. But all these three inputs have to be on an equal basis. It cannot be that external affairs says all external affairs is my job and subordinates the Ministry of Petroleum, or that the economic ministry says we'll look after petroleum, you don't have to bother about it. It's only if all the three ministries work in coordination with each other that we can have full scale national security. Now, in this, I want to concentrate on energy security because that is the responsibility of the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, whose minister I was for just under 2 years between 2004 and 2006. At that time, what I noted was that energy security for India lies on two separate tracks. One is the domestic track of being increasingly self sufficient in sources of energy within the country. And the other track is being as secure as we can in the import of energy. I'll take up the two separately. As far as the domestic track is concerned, India is regarded as being terribly oil and gas deficient, whereas our proximate neighborhood, that is all the way to Syria on the west and to Azerbaijan in the north, they're all very, very full of energy. So is Myanmar. So all over the proximate neighborhood, we have sources of oil and gas. But we ourselves are apparently deficient. I said that before we deal with the external track, let's look at the domestic track. The domestic track is twofold: onshore and offshore. Now, onshore, we have a lot of petroleum reserves, but they are caught under what is called the Deccan Trap. What is the Deccan Trap? When the island of Gondwana split from Antarctica about 60 million years ago and started sailing towards East Eurasia, they passed by Madagascar at a time when there was an enormous number of volcanoes which blew up. And unfortunately, the lava and the volcanic rock of these numerous volcanic explosions fell on Gondwana, at that part of Gondwana which was destined to become the Deccan Plateau. So below, so today it's called the Deccan Trap. Trapped in the Deccan Trap is a vast quantity of fossils and fossil fuel, but we have to dig through lava and volcanic rock to be able to reach that fossil fuel. To do that, you need a very special technology that doesn't exist anywhere. And the reason for that is that this kind of a problem only exists in India and on a much smaller scale in Colorado. So they've tried some experiments there, but we need to network a global scientific and technological institutions which will work along with us towards the evolution of a technology that will enable us to drill in the Deccan Trap. And were we to succeed, we might well be the Saudi Arabia of South Asia. The second track is called the offshore track. We are surrounded by three seas: the Bay of Bengal, the Arabian Sea, and the Indian Ocean. As far as the Indian Ocean is concerned, all that we have control over is the Pork Straits. The Bay of Bengal is where Reliance claimed in my day that they had found lots of gas off the Krishna Godavari basin. That was just rumoring, mongering, because they haven't found it really. On the Arabia, off the Arabian coast, Arabian Sea coast, however, we've already found Bombay High in 1973, and it is the biggest source of fossil fuel for the last 50 years, and it's still going. So I was told by experts that there are other sources of fossil fuel off the Arabian Sea coast, say in the Konkan Kerala area. But unfortunately, the sea is very, very deep. The continental shelf, which slowly declines in many other parts of the world, very sharply declines off the Arabian Sea coast, was there. But they were fortunate to find it. Here, the expectation is that the depth might be as much as 10,000 meters. And so, when I was off the Norwegian coast in the North Sea, I went to a rig and I asked them, at what depth do you drill? And they said 150 meters. I said, in India, we would not call this the North Sea. We would call it the North Lake. The only place in the world where there's comparable deep sea drilling is in the Gulf of Mexico. So I visited Houston and I contacted Exxon, who are drilling in the Gulf of Mexico. And they said they would be more than happy to share their technology with us, provided it was developed further to reach the depths that we need to reach. So I was engaged in building these research, scientific, and technology networks that would enable us to reach our own gas and oil onshore as well as offshore. So until the domestic track is really secured, and we know that we have got as much fossil fuel as Saudi Arabia has for a much, much larger population, only then can we rest satisfied that we have security from our domestic sources. Until then, we will remain dependent on the external sources.
I also have one question that you pitched an idea once you were in ministry that we should have a pipeline through Iran and Pakistan, which you may. Yeah.
We'll come to that. We'll come to that. Because you have to understand the background. External sources are purchasing the oil or having long term contracts for the oil and gas or making spot purchases from vessels which are to be found in the Indian Ocean carrying gas and oil. Of course, the spot prices are much higher than the contract prices. Also, the Chinese in particular have been exploring fields in Iraq, in Iran, in Africa, in Latin America, so that although they are located, say, in South Sudan or located in, say, Venezuela, they are actually Chinese properties. And I found that our pathetic attempts at securing foreign fields for ourselves was not working because the Chinese have much deeper pockets than we have. And therefore, I went all the way to China to make an arrangement with them that if we were going to compete, let us agree among ourselves as to what should be the ceiling. Because if we don't have a ceiling, we had discovered that China had been forced to pay more than $2 billion extra because India was competing. So I said it's in our mutual interest that we determine the ceiling, even if we continue competing. And as part of all this exercise, at going into our proximate neighborhood. Now, please note that India is energy short, but Iran, Iraq, the Gulf states, they're all huge sources of energy. Not only that, all the states that surround the Caspian Sea, these are Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, the Russian Federation, and Azerbaijan. They all have enormous quantities of oil and gas coming out of a source called Chirag, which is an Urdu word. It's called Chirag in the Caspian Sea. And although there are tremendous difficulties, a pipeline has been drawn from Baku, which is the
Yeah.
capital of Azerbaijan, through Tbilisi, which is the capital of Georgia, and down through eastern Turkey to a port on the eastern Mediterranean called Jehan. Now, this BTC pipeline passes through some of the most dangerous areas in the world, including Abkhazia and South Ossetia, which are in revolt as Caucasian countries against Russia. Notwithstanding this, they have drawn the pipeline, and the pipeline ends in Jehan, which is through Turkish Kurdistan, which is also a very insecure area. So I said, if they can do that, then surely we can pull a pipeline from Iran through Pakistan into Rajasthan. Why Rajasthan? Because Rajasthan, at least at that time, had no oil and no coal. So they didn't have any source of energy. But if we brought Iranian crude from around the Gulf area through a pipeline, which would serve both Pakistan and India, then Pakistani shortages would be ended, Indian shortages would be met, not ended, but met. And what the price we would get would be lower than anything that Pakistan could pay because India would take the bulk of the gas and Pakistan would only be a minor consumer. But between the two of us, we could ensure energy security for the whole of the subcontinent. And we could work out methods by which every square centimeter of the pipeline could be monitored from a neutral place like Dubai. And if there was a breakdown anywhere, and the Pakistanis were being difficult about it, then we would have an agreement with Iran that they would stop the supply of gas to Pakistan. And since Pakistan is far more dependent on natural gas than we are, they would not be able to block that pipe without damaging themselves. So this was the argument I placed before cabinet, and Dr. Manmohan Singh accepted the argument. Natwar Singh, as the External Affairs Minister, accepted the argument, but the Foreign Secretary and his civil servants were still fighting some battle with Pakistan, but they were overruled. And I succeeded in visiting both Pakistan and Iran to start the process. But just at that time, I was removed from the Ministry of Petroleum, of which, in any case, I had only been given temporary charge. So I tried to ask my successors, both of the UPA government and Dharmendra Pradhan, who became the minister with the NDA government, to continue looking at energy security as the most important task of the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas. Instead of doing that, they started looking for where can we buy petroleum and gas most cheaply and on long-term contracts. The result is that our external dependency on fossil fuel has grown from 70% in my time over the last 20 years to 90%. 90% dependence. Now, this is not any way of securing our energy security. The consequence is that now that the crisis has come upon us, whatever the government may say, please look at the long queues for LPG cylinders and you'll know the truth. There is a cooking gas shortage in India. It is most affecting the poorest of the poor, who are the migrant workers, because they depend on dhabas, and dhabas have been weaned away from the old stoves and the old chulas and made dependent upon these gas cylinders. So, if they don't get gas cylinders, then the poorest people in India, who are the migrant workers, will not have the nutrition required to do their work. And that will affect economic growth over every sector of India. Then there is the households. The households have now become totally dependent on cooking gas. They don't use chulas. They don't use. Don't even use electric stoves until a week ago, and therefore you're affecting every household in India. Every lady who is a homemaker is now turning in fury towards this government, which has not made arrangements. Could they have made arrangements? Of course they could have, because it was clear as after the Hamas attack and the retaliation, which was the genocide and total physical destruction of Gaza over a period of 1 year or more than 1 year, 18 months, that the Israelis had not been able to break the Palestinian spirit, and therefore the Palestinian resistance would continue. At the same time, it became clear that Iran, which is the most ferocious of the anti Zionist forces in West Asia was not going to buckle down. So Trump thought, and Netanyahu thought, that with that 12-day war in June 2025, they would be able to knock out every facility that could produce a nuclear bomb. And they claimed they had done so. But it became clear then that the war was only half completed, that it was going to get completed. And anyone who knows the geography of Iran knows that the country with the longest coastline along the Gulf is Iran, which is why they call it the Persian Gulf. And since the Persian Gulf ends at the Straits of Hormuz, which is only 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest, it was obvious that the first thing the Iranians would do, if their very existence was threatened, would be to close the Straits of Hormuz. And since 40% of our gas comes from Qatar, it would be stopped. And we are now 90% dependent. But our households don't need LNG, they need LPG. They need it at home for cooking your breakfast. Even if your breakfast is nothing but kanji, you still need it for cooking your lunch, for cooking your tea, for cooking your dinner. Every household, however rich it may be or however poor it may be, is dependent on cooking gas because you've now made cooking gas universally available. So it's all very well to claim कि हमने ये सब किया है and then not be able to allow those stoves to work because there's no gas. Now, we have always had a policy of stocking crude oil against a crisis. So we built up a large crude oil stock near Vishakhapatnam, where in the mountains of the eastern Ghats, not the western Ghats, the eastern Ghats, there are caverns there. And so we've used them to store crude oil. Now, in a similar way, the minute there was either the Hamas attack or at least the 12-day war, any awake, alert minister of petroleum would have said, but what happens to our gas from Qatar? What happens to our gas from Iraq? What happens to our gas from Iran if the Straits of Hormuz are closed? And closing the Straits of Hormuz is the most important defensive action that Iran can take. And recognizing this, we could have started stocking up on our LPG. You see, we do have two caverns in which we are already stocking LPG. One is near Mangaluru on the west coast, one is near Vishakhapatnam on the east coast. But the amount of LPG we have stocked in Mangaluru and in Vishakhapatnam is equal, according to an expert writing in the Hindu newspaper, it's only equal to 1 day's consumption. But he was referring only to Mangalore. So if you take Vishakhapatnam into account, perhaps we have 2 or 3 days, I don't know, but not much more than that. Now, what are you going to do with a stock that will get depleted in 2 or 3 days? What we should have done is stocked up on LPG during the year between June 2025 and now March 2026. Or better still, to have spotted that all this was going to be happening after October 2023 and use the last 2.5 years to stock up. If you're stocking up on crude oil, why are you not stocking up on LPG? Why do you think that the job of the Minister of Petroleum is to buy more and more fossil oil from abroad instead of looking to see what additional supplies we can get in India and what additional supplies we can get from Indian old fields abroad rather than be stuck completely only on paid imports by vessels pipelines would be much safer. And if you had, I mentioned the BTC, I dislike Israel. I think it's an evil country. But nevertheless, I looked at the map and I found that pipeline, the BTC pipeline could easily be extended to a port called Ashkelon on the Israeli Mediterranean coast. And that from there, if we brought a pipeline down to Eilat, which is at the head of the Gulf of Aqaba, we would bypass the Strait of Hormuz. Also, I found that the biggest supplier of natural gas to Europe is Algeria. Now, we have a pipeline which the Iranians built from the Bab al Mandab, which is a choke point of the Red Sea, to the Mediterranean coast of Egypt. I said, why don't we lay a pipeline parallel to that from, what do you call it, from the Mediterranean coast of Egypt to the Bab al Mandab? And if we did that, then we would have a source of gas from North Africa and very possibly from West Africa, going all the way down to the Democratic Republic of Congo, and then get the gas from there. So, if you were going to buy gas, why don't you do it imaginatively? Why is it that you concentrate just on Qatar hai, तो वहां से खरीद लेंगे मामला खत्म and then say नहीं नहीं रूस में है तो वहां से भी हम खरीद लेंगे. This kind of very narrow short term thinking has characterized the NDA. They don't know how to look at a map. They don't know how to look at an energy map and make the arrangements well on time. Now they're saying, they're boasting that we have invoked the Essential Commodities Act. And you should have done it years ago. They say that we've asked the oil companies to ramp up their LPG production. You could have done it a year ago. They say that now we are going to buy a spot. You could have done that a year ago. And even if the spot prices were higher, they wouldn't be as high as they're going to be now. So, lack of crisis management is really based on a lack of appreciation of what national security means. Mr. Doval knows nothing about energy security. Mr. Goel doesn't know anything about energy security. Madam Sita Raman, I don't know what she knows. But the one thing I'm sure she doesn't know about is energy security. Because if they had known about it, then surely they could have advised Hardeep Puri to do what he was not doing. Instead of which, each one of them was looking after his own compartment. And the result is that our national security has never been more endangered than it is today. So, the answer lies in having a holistic view of national security, in which geopolitical security is the job of the Ministry of External Affairs, economic security is the job of the economic ministries, and energy security is the principal job of the energy ministry, which is the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas. And maybe we should be renaming the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas as the Ministry of Energy Security. That might focus their minds. But today, we have been put into a deep crisis only because of the utter irresponsibility displayed by Modi's government and most of all by the National Security Agency. If I were Modi, and thank God I'm not, I would tomorrow sack Ajit Doval, Sita Raman, Goyal, and above all, Hardeep Puri. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for joining us.